You weren't destroyed by enemies. You were undone by your own kindness. They didn't stab you in the back. They smiled to your face while they drained you dry. It wasn't a betrayal marked by war cries or chaos. It was silence. It was softness. It was you showing up over and over, thinking your goodness would be your shield, not your downfall. You weren't destroyed by hate. You were undone by what looked like love. The warm smile that disarmed you. The apology that never came but still kept you hooked. The gentle voice that asked for one more chance. And you gave it because that's what you were taught. Be good, be patient, be nice, even if it bleeds you out. You thought being kind made you strong. You thought giving endlessly meant you were mature. But no one told you that predators prefer prey that doesn't scream. They don't need to break you loudly. Not when you'll hand them the pieces yourself, neatly labeled, with a smile. And the worst part, you blamed yourself. You wondered if you were too trusting, too soft, too naive. But the truth is, you were trained to be that way. Trained to think that if you just loved hard enough, stayed long enough, tolerated more than anyone else, you'd finally be chosen. You were raised on the illusion that virtue guarantees victory, that if you were enough, kind enough, loyal enough, forgiving enough, the world would reward you. But look around, is that what happened? Or did you end up erased while they walked away whole? This isn't going to be a feel-good sermon. This is not comfort. This is clarity. Clarity that cuts. And if you're still bleeding for people who barely noticed, then it's time to ask yourself, were you ever safe or just silent? The soft lie you were raised on from the moment you could walk, speak, or even feel, they began writing a script for you, and you followed it like it was gospel. Smile when it hurts. Say yes even when every cell in your body is screaming no. Be polite, be agreeable, be helpful, because that's how good people are raised. And every time you complied, they clapped. Good boy. Such a sweet girl. So mature. But they weren't praising you for your strength. They were rewarding your silence, your compliance, your predictability. You didn't choose to be soft. You were shaped to be that way. What they called virtue was really obedience. What they called emotional intelligence was emotional suppression. You were taught that kindness would protect you, that if you made yourself small enough, agreeable enough, digestible enough, people would treat you gently. But they didn't. They used you gently, quietly, in ways you didn't notice until years later, when the exhaustion hit and the resentment festered. Because here's the truth they never told you. Being liked is not the same as being respected. And being easy to love is not the same as being hard to hurt. Damn though. You were taught to avoid conflict at all costs, to be the better person, to forgive quickly, even when it shattered you. They told you that being good meant never raising your voice, never drawing a line, never making anyone uncomfortable. So you didn't. You swallowed your frustration. You made excuses for their behavior. You stayed silent, even when your soul was screaming for you to speak. And the world loved you for it, not because it respected you, but because your silence made their lives easier. You were rewarded for erasing yourself, for being the one who carried the weight, who stayed calm, who never made demands. They called it patience. They called it wisdom. But what it really was programming. They built you to serve others' comfort, not your own clarity. And every time you stayed when you should have walked away, every time you forgave what was unforgivable, you weren't being strong. You were being used. You believed love was about sacrifice, that if you just gave more, bent more, tolerated more, someone would finally choose you. But the more you gave, the more they took, and the less you had left for yourself. They mistook your kindness for weakness. They confused your loyalty for blindness. And worst of all, you started to believe them. You thought you just weren't not good enough. You thought if you became even more loving, more patient, more silent, maybe then you'd be seen. But all it did was teach them how to step over you without consequence. So now you sit with that weight in your chest, that aching, quiet regret, wondering how something as beautiful as kindness could become your downfall. But you're not broken. You're waking up. And what you're feeling isn't weakness. It's the first breath of clarity after years of emotional suffocation. You were raised on a soft lie, but it's time to unlearn it. The quiet cost of being good. They never warn you about the cost of goodness. They sing its praises. They tattoo it into your identity. Be nice, be humble, be giving, as if being good is free, as if it doesn't come with a receipt. But it does, and it's not paid in cash. It's paid in silence, in swallowed emotions, in the way your name disappears in a room full of people you've rescued. Being good doesn't hurt at first. It feels noble, like maybe you're doing what others can't. You're absorbing the pain, you're calming the storm, you're making things easier for everyone else. But then the ache sets in, slow, quiet, invisible. Not a scream, not a breakdown, just a dull, unshakable exhaustion. The kind that doesn't go away with sleep. The kind that buries itself in your bones. Because being good in a world that worships convenience turns you into a utility, not a person. People start to see you not for who you are, but for what you provide. Your peace, your patience, your predictable forgiveness. And soon you're not a presence. You're a service, a role, a background character in their chaos, always there to absorb, soothe, understand, and expect nothing in return. You become the one who's always okay, the one who doesn't need much, the one who never complains. They stop asking how you are because you've trained them not to. You've made it easy for them to forget you have needs too. And you thought that made you strong. But strength without boundaries is just erosion in disguise. You start to shrink just a little, not visibly, not all at once, but in the way you stop asking for help, in the way you start saying it's fine when it's absolutely not, in the way you brush off ear hurt because you don't want to be a burden. That's how it begins, not with betrayal, but with micro-abandonments of yourself, done in the name of being the good one. You forget what it's like to ask for something without guilt. You forget what it's like to take up space without apologizing. And the worst part? No one notices. Not because they're cruel, but because you trained them not to. You made your pain look graceful. You made your silence look like strength. You made your depletion look like balance. And they believed you. You wore the mask so well that they forgot it was a mask. And then one day you look in the mirror and don't recognize what's left. The fire in your eyes is dim. Your voice feels foreign. Your spine, once straight with conviction, now curves around the weight of everyone's expectations. This is the quiet cost of being good. You disappear, not all at once, but piece by piece, smile by smile, forgiveness by forgiveness, until one day you realize you've become invisible in your own life. And no one claps for that kind of sacrifice. So if you're sitting there wondering why it feels like you're drowning in still water, why you're exhausted without doing anything, why people seem to love your goodness but leave when you finally need something back, this is your answer. You never asked for too much. You just gave too much to people who expected it like a subscription. And now it's time to cancel that service, because your goodness was never the problem. It was the fact that no one told you. It has a cost. Why manipulators win and good people bleed. You have asked yourself the question more times than you can count. Why do the liars always win? Why do the cold ones get chosen? Why does kindness keep getting crucified while cruelty walks free? It's not because manipulators are smarter. It's not because they're more talented. It's because they understand something you were never taught. That in a world built on perception, power goes to the one who plays the game, not the one who plays fair. You were raised to believe that sincerity was strength, that openness builds trust, that if you're honest about how you feel, people will honor that. But manipulators were raised on a different rule book. They don't seek connection, they seek leverage. And you, with your soft heart and transparent emotions, became the perfect manual to read, to study, and to control. They watch how you respond to guilt, how you flinch when someone withdraws, how you try to fix things even when you're the one bleeding. And they file it all away. Because once they know your pattern, they don't have to overpower you. They just have to predict you. And when someone can predict your every move, They don't need strength, they just need patience. So they test you. They ghost you, then reappear. They say something hurtful, then act like nothing happened. They dangle affection like a treat, just out of reach. And when you chase it, they know they've got you. Because you think if you just explain yourself better, if you just love them harder, they'll finally understand. But they're not confused, they're calculating. They know your kindness is a script, that your fear of being abandoned makes you easy to bend, that your longing to be understood makes you easy to keep on the hook. And every time you give them another chance, you're not healing the relationship, you're training them. You're teaching them that they can hurt you without consequence, that you'll stay as long as they say the right words, or sometimes nothing at all. And it's not always malicious. Some of them don't even realize what they're doing, but they've learned that when you love someone who fears being too much, you can do just enough to keep them unsure, unsteady, but present. And you, with your depth and loyalty, stay. Not because you're weak, but because you were taught to look for the good even when the bad is bleeding you dry. You were taught that love means sticking it out, that real connection is messy, that relationships take work, even if the only one working is you. But there's a difference between effort and emotional labor, between love and survival, between healing and self-abandonment. The manipulator doesn't need to destroy you. All they need is your cooperation, your silence, your tolerance, your belief that this is just what love looks like. That's the final weapon. They don't take your power. You hand it to them gift-wrapped in compassion because you're trying so hard not to be the villain. But let me ask you this. Who's been the villain in your story? Because someone's been rewriting your worth with every boundary you never enforced, with every second chance they never earned, with every drop of yourself you poured into their emptiness, hoping they'd one day fill you back. But manipulators don't give back. They take, strategically, quietly, repeatedly. And it's not because they're stronger, it's because no one ever taught you how to stop bleeding for people who enjoy the sight. Machiavelli's warning: never be too readable. In a world obsessed with transparency, Machiavelli warned us of something no one in modern self-help books dares to say out loud. He who reveals his intentions has already surrendered. Let that sit for a moment, because you've been told the opposite your whole life. That honesty is always the best policy. That if you just open up more, if you just explain yourself clearly enough, people will understand you. They'll respect you. They'll finally get you. But they didn't, did they? They didn't hear your pain when you explained it. They didn't change when you revealed your wounds. They didn't protect you when you showed them your rawest truths. Instead, they memorized you. They studied your patterns, your triggers, your breaking points. They learned when to pull away and when to show up just enough to keep you tethered. Because once someone knows exactly where your heart lives, they know how to knock the breath out of you without ever laying a finger. You gave them a map, not because you're foolish, but because you're honest. And you believed honesty was protection. But maps don't just guide lovers, they also guide invaders. Not everyone who listens is listening to understand you. Some are listening to use you. Not everyone who mirrors your emotions is trying to connect. Some are simply trying to measure you, decode you, plot you, and once they can predict you, they can move you. That's the part no one tells you. Predictability is power for the other person. The more you explain, the more you reveal, the more you narrate your thoughts and feelings, the more you hand people the exact buttons to press. They know how to make you stay, how to provoke a reaction, how to gaslight without being obvious. Because you taught them how your heart works, assuming they'd protect it, not dissect it. This is where Machiavelli comes in, not as a cynic, but as a realist. He understood something most nice people never want to admit. Power isn't found in how much you share. It's found in how much you withhold. Mystery protects. Predictability invites control. You've spent your life trying to be understood, but the cost was steep. You handed out explanations like apologies, hoping the clarity would build bridges. But what it really did was lower your defenses and invite architects of manipulation into your foundation. Because when someone knows your fears, your hopes, your longings, they don't always use that knowledge to get closer. Sometimes they use it to keep you exactly where they want you, compliant, available, and second-guessing yourself. That's why your silence unsettles them now. That's why your distance makes them chase. Because unpredictability is unnerving to people who once controlled you by knowing how you'd react. You are no longer an open book. You're a closed vault, not out of fear, but out of precision. You've learned that not everyone deserves access, that not everyone needs to know your plans, your process, your next move. Because the more unpredictable you become, the less they can script you, the less they can use your compassion as a weapon. So the next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, don't. Let them wonder. Let them squirm in the silence they used to fill with commands. Let them sit in the void they once mistook for power. Because your unpredictability is no longer a flaw. It's your protection. And Machiavelli knew the most dangerous person in the room is the one who speaks little, reveals less, and moves like fog, seen but never held. The myth of endurance as love. They told you to hold on, to be strong, to weather the storm and wait for the change. They told you love is patient, that loyalty is about staying when it's hard. And you believe them. You believed that the measure of your love was how much pain you could absorb without breaking. You believed that your willingness to endure would one day be rewarded with peace, gratitude, or even just recognition. But that day never came. Because here's the cruel truth. In the wrong hands, endurance isn't a virtue. It's an invitation. It tells people they can take more, push more, hurt more, and you'll still be there. Endurance becomes your cage. And they become your jailers, not by force, but by your permission. You stayed after the apologies that never turned into change. You stayed through the cycles of hurt, silence, and fake repair. You stayed because you thought that was strength. You thought quitting meant you failed. But there's a difference between quitting and refusing to bleed for someone who never learned how to hold a heart. You weren't strong for staying, you were scared. Scared that walking away would mean you wasted time. Scared that setting boundaries would make you the villain. Scared that no one else would love you if you stopped making yourself small enough to fit inside someone else's comfort. But here's the thing, they never respected your endurance. They depended on it. They built their bad habits around your forgiveness. They tested the limits of your patience, knowing you'd fold before they did. And every time you stayed, they learned something. That your pain wasn't urgent. That your standards were negotiable, that your silence was approval. And so they pushed, and you didn't push back, not because you lacked courage, but because you'd been taught that love without sacrifice isn't real love. But that's a lie. Endurance without reciprocity is not love. It's self-betrayal. You told yourself, if I hold on long enough, they'll see my value. But they won't. Because people don't wake up and start valuing what they have learned they can discard. They only start valuing when they sense loss. Not comfort, not constancy, not your unending presence. They change when they fear losing you. And if there's no cost to mistreating you, if your loyalty is unconditional, then why should they ever become better? The harsh truth? People don't stop crossing lines until you stop erasing them. But here you are. Bruised by your own endurance, tired of giving chances, tired of asking for the bare minimum, tired of being tired. It's not because you're broken, it's because you finally hit the threshold where clarity begins. The place where you realize that staying isn't noble when it's killing you. That love without boundaries is just emotional erosion wrapped in pretty language. That being the bigger person only works if you're not constantly shrinking yourself into silence. So here's your permission. You don't have to stay. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to keep carrying what someone else refuses to even hold. You're allowed to redefine love, not as the ability to endure, but as the ability to choose yourself without guilt. Because if endurance is your only proof of love, then it was never love to begin with. Becoming the storm, not the shelter. There comes a moment, usually after your last apology, after your final swallowed boundary, when something inside you snaps, but not in the way they expect. You don't yell, you don't rage, You don't write long messages begging to be understood. You go quiet, not because you've given up, but because you've finally woken up. You begin to realize you were never supposed to be the shelter. Not for everyone, not for people who treat your soul like a storm shelter, only showing up when they need cover, then disappearing when the sky's clear. You were never meant to be the safe space for people who build chaos and then seek peace in your forgiveness. And that's when the transformation begins. Not with noise, but with stillness. You stop explaining, you stop softening your words just to avoid discomfort. You stop offering access to people who've proven over and over again that they don't value the space you created for them. They never wanted the real you. They wanted the version of you that absorbed impact and never retaliated. But you're not that anymore. You're not the safe landing spot for emotional cowards. You're not the therapist for the person who refuses to change. You're not the emotionally available stand-in for people who can't even be honest with themselves. You're not the fixer. You're not the soft light in the corner anymore. Now you're the storm, not destructive, not malicious, but powerful, unpredictable, uncontainable. You walk into rooms differently, not because you want to be feared, but because you're no longer willing to be used. Your presence sharpens. People feel it before you speak. Your silence gains weight. Your eyes stop asking, will they stay? And start wondering, do they even deserve proximity? That's what becoming the storm means. It's the shift from being the one who absorbs damage to being the one who refuses to tolerate it. It's the refusal to be the emotional sponge, the peacekeeper, the safe fallback plan. Because being endlessly available made you forget how valuable your presence truly was. You don't owe comfort to people who treat your boundaries like inconveniences. You don't owe softness to people who weaponize your calm. You don't owe forgiveness to those who only seek it so they can hurt you again without guilt. And when they start to say you've changed, believe them, because you have. You stopped asking for permission. You stopped waiting for people to do right by you. You stopped proving your worth by staying longer than you should have. You became something sharper, clearer, quieter, but stronger. You don't chase anymore. You don't beg. You don't repeat yourself. You let them sit with the silence they once forced you to carry alone. You let them feel the weight of your absence, the way they once ignored your presence. And that absence? That is your storm. That is your power. It doesn't destroy, it redefines. Because when you stop being the shelter for those who start fires, you become the one who commands the weather. You don't ask for peace. You become the reason people reconsider throwing chaos your way. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to prove you're strong. All you need is to stop absorbing what was never yours to carry, and the room shifts. That's what they never saw coming. You standing in your silence, still, but unshakable. No longer explaining, no longer saving, no longer waiting. Not their shelter, their storm. Weaponizing silence in mystery. They used to know how to move you. A sigh here, a tear there, a well-timed, I didn't mean it. They memorized your emotional blueprint. Not because they cared about your healing, but because it made you easier to control, easier to predict, easier to guilt. Every time you opened up, every time you over-explained, every time you laid your emotions bare hoping to be understood, you handed them a playbook. You taught them how to disarm you with softness, how to provoke a reaction, how to keep you spinning. That's why your silence terrifies them now. You see, when you were always available, always transparent, always emotionally legible, you were safe, not for yourself, but for them. They knew exactly what to expect, and that predictability made you easy to keep in orbit. But now you've changed the rules. You've stopped being a mirror and started being a wall. Not cold, just unreadable. And they don't know what to do with that. Because silence, real silence, it's not emptiness, it's authority. It's what happens when you no longer feel the need to defend, explain, or entertain the people who once feasted on your openness. Let them ask questions. Let them project. Let them spin narratives about who you are now. Let them say you're distant, cold, egotistical. That's not your concern. Their confusion is not your emergency, Because here's what most people never learn. When you're unpredictable, you control the tempo. You control the room. You decide who gets access. Not because you're hiding, but because you're done bleeding clarity for people who never earned it. They can't manipulate what they can't read. They can't pre-script a conversation when they don't know which version of you will walk in. And they can't use guilt, nostalgia, or shame if you don't bite the bait. If you let the silence stretch long enough to make them feel what they once forced you to carry alone. Mystery breaks cycles. It interrupts the pattern. It makes them think twice. Because now you're not rushing in with apologies. You're not scrambling to smooth things over. You're not picking up emotional glass they shattered. You're watching, calmly, clearly, but in that stillness, it makes people panic. Because silence demands accountability. It creates space, the kind of space manipulators hate. The kind of space where their tactics echo, exposed and powerless. They need your reaction to feel control. And when you give them none, when your face is unreadable, your voice calm, your presence unwavering, that's not detachment, that's strategy. You've stopped giving away your tells. You've stopped narrating your moves. You've learned that peace isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about stepping back far enough to see whether it deserves to be saved at all. This isn't passive aggression. This is power. It's you mastering your own energy. It's you moving deliberately. It's you deciding that not every battle is worth your voice. Some are better won in silence. Let them miss you. Let them wonder. Let your absence ring louder than any words you could have said. You don't need to announce your growth. People will feel it in the discomfort of your distance. They'll feel it in the absence of the old you, the one who used to explain, to overgive, to stretch and bend and bleed just to prove you were good. That version of you, gone. What's left now doesn't scream to be heard. It waits, because unreadable means untouchable, and untouchable means unbreakable. Emotional economics and power reclaimed. There's a simple law in the world of power that no one teaches you growing up. If your energy is free, people will treat it like it's worthless. That's the economy you were never taught to calculate. The economy of emotional labor, of availability, of presence. You spent your whole life giving without charging, explaining without being asked, showing up without hesitation. You thought that being generous with your time, your feelings, your forgiveness made you a good person. And maybe it did, but it also made you a predictable one, a usable one. Because when people learn that your silence never means goodbye, that your forgiveness always shows up eventually, that your kindness never has a cost, they stop valuing it, not out of malice, out of human nature. We don't treasure what we can reach on demand, we treasure what we might lose. So here's where the shift begins. You start treating your presence like currency. Scarce, valuable, strategic. Not everyone gets access just because they ask nicely. Not everyone deserves the behind-the-scenes tour of your heart. Not everyone qualifies for your emotional generosity just because they cry or panic, or say the right words at the right moment. That's how you used to move. That's what cost you your center. Now you calculate, not out of coldness, out of self-possession. You stop answering texts immediately just to soothe someone's anxiety. You stop explaining your silence to people who never explained their disrespect. You stop pouring from your cup into hands that never thought to fill it back. This is what emotional economics looks like in practice. You become selective, not reactive, not desperate to be understood. You learn to withhold, not to punish, but to protect. Because every time you gave someone your energy without discernment, you taught them they didn't need to respect your boundaries to keep you. And every time you over-explained, you trained them to believe your truth was negotiable. But now you move differently. Now your silence is a decision, not a wound. Your distance is a filter, not a tantrum. You're not running from anyone. You're just no longer offering discounts on access to your soul. Let them feel the absence. Let them feel what it's like to be unsure of your presence, to question if they still have the key, because the old version of you would have gone back just to avoid discomfort, just to keep things okay, just to stop them from thinking you're selfish or cold. But the new you isn't okay with being drained. You're not okay with giving love that isn't returned. You're not okay with investing in people who treat your depth like an emotional vending machine. Press a few buttons, get a response. Because now you understand your energy has value. Not everyone gets the same version of you. Not everyone deserves the same proximity. You're not bitter. You're aware. You've stepped out of the identity of the overgiver. You've stopped bleeding emotionally just to keep connections intact. You've stopped subsidizing relationships that only survive when you're the one sacrificing. This is the new math. Emotional labor must be earned. And presence? That's the highest currency you own. Let your presence say what your words no longer need to. Let your stillness carry the weight your explanations used to hold. You don't need to convince anyone anymore. You don't need to prove you're worth loving. You don't need to keep playing the role of the always there, always understanding, always healing person just to feel seen. Because now you're not offering yourself up. You're investing, and only where it returns. That's not arrogance. That's power. From performance to presence, you were never weak. You were just convinced that shrinking yourself was strength, that being available was love, that giving endlessly without ever asking for anything in return made you valuable. But now, standing on the other side of all that silent sacrifice, you know the truth. You were bleeding for a world that only loved you when it was convenient. They never clapped for your healing unless it benefited them. They never respected your boundaries unless you enforced them with distance. They never loved you for your truth, only for your ability to hide it when it made them uncomfortable. And now you've stopped explaining. You've stopped justifying your standards. You've stopped handing out emotional access like free samples. You've stopped performing peace to avoid making waves. You've realized that clarity is the revolution. That stillness is not passive, it's strategic. That your silence is no longer a blank page for others to write their story on. It's a wall, a fortress, not built out of bitterness, but out of memory, out of data, out of the painful, lived understanding that people don't change when you endure them. They change when they fear losing you. You are no longer afraid of being called cold. You're afraid of disappearing into someone else's comfort again. That's the shift. That's the power. You've stopped being a mirror for others' projections. You've become the architect of your own presence. And yes, they'll notice. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you've become distant, arrogant, too quiet, too mysterious. But what they're really saying is they've lost access to the version of you they controlled. And it stings, not because you're gone, but because now they can't get to you. They can't read you. They can't guilt you into explaining yourself again. They can't depend on your forgiveness as a shortcut to avoid accountability. This is the new you, and it's not louder. It's not cruel. It's not a vengeance arc. It's precision. It's what Machiavelli warned us to cultivate all along. Controlled perception, emotional sovereignty, strategic silence. Because the world does not reward the kind. It rewards the clear. And in your clarity, you've become someone even you can finally trust. You no longer flinch at disapproval. You no longer fear withdrawal. You no longer beg to be understood in rooms where you've only ever been studied. You've stopped narrating your healing. You've stopped explaining your distance. You move like a presence, not a person to be managed. You are not a question mark anymore. You are a statement, a closing one, not angry, not broken, but finished. And now they remember you not because you screamed, but because when they tried the same script again, you were no longer there. That is the kind of power they can't steal. That is what sovereignty sounds like.